My name's Kira. I'm 26 years old, and by the time this night was over, a stranger's coat around my shoulders would mean more to me than anything my husband ever gave me in 5 years of marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this starts. If you're new here, this is RP, Forbidden Romances, and if you like real stories about love finding people in the last place they expect it, hit follow, drop a like, and give this video a little hype so we can keep bringing you more. Now, let me take you back to that night in Boston, because I still remember every single detail of it. I came to this country from Russia when I was 19, chasing a modeling career that somehow actually worked out. I built a name for myself in a city that doesn't easily let outsiders in, and for a while, I thought I'd found my place. I married a man from one of those old Boston families, the kind with portraits of ancestors hanging in the hallway. I thought I'd finally belonged somewhere. I was wrong about that, and I found out just how wrong 3 weeks before this story even begins. That's when I discovered my husband had been having an affair, not with another woman, like I might have expected. With a man. It wasn't just the affair that broke something in me. It was the years of lies wrapped around it, the version of myself I'd built around a marriage that was never what I thought it was. I signed the separation papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and I told myself I was done crying about it. I was lying to myself, and some part of me knew it. The night this story really starts, there was a gala, the biggest one of the year, held in an old historic hotel downtown. The kind of event where half the city's money and power gets dressed up and put in one room. I almost didn't go. My publicist convinced me that skipping it would look worse than showing up, that people would talk either way, so I might as well walk in with my head high. I remember standing in front of my mirror that evening, thinking I looked like someone who had everything together. I didn't feel like her at all. Boston in the winter has this particular kind of cold that gets into your bones no matter how many layers you put on. That night, the wind outside the hotel was brutal, cutting straight through the elegant dresses of everyone rushing from their cars to the entrance. Inside, it was warm gold light, champagne, and the low hum of conversations meant to sound casual, but were really just people watching each other. I walked in wearing a deep green gown, and for a moment, I actually felt like myself again. That feeling didn't last long. 20 minutes into the event, I found myself locked inside a bathroom stall, my back pressed against the cold tile wall, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. My makeup was still perfect. My hands were not. I kept hearing his name in my head, over and over, along with every quiet cruelty from these last few weeks. I pressed a tissue carefully under my eyes so I wouldn't ruin anything, because the last thing I needed was to walk back out there looking like I'd been crying. I sat there longer than I should have, listening to the muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses through the door. Somewhere out there, in that same room, was a version of my life I no longer recognized. I kept thinking about how easy it used to be to walk into rooms like this one, how I used to feel like I owned every space I entered. Now I felt like an intruder in my own story, like I was borrowing a life that had already ended. I finally stood up, smoothed down the front of my dress, and looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. My reflection looked calm, composed, nothing like the storm underneath. I told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself for weeks, that I just needed to get through tonight, and tomorrow would be easier. I didn't believe it, not really, but saying it out loud in my head gave me just enough courage to open that door. Walking back into the ballroom felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone already knew the ending of the play except me. I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, a few openly amused. Word travels fast in this city, especially when it's the kind of gossip that makes people feel better about their own messy lives. I kept my chin up and my shoulders back, because if there's one thing modeling teaches you, it's how to walk into a room like nothing can touch you. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray, more for something to hold than anything else. My fingers were cold around the stem, and I remember focusing on that small sensation just to keep myself grounded. Around me, the party moved like it always did, all silk and perfume and practiced smiles. I told myself I only needed to survive an hour, maybe 2, and then I could disappear back home where nobody was watching. For just a moment, standing there in the middle of all that gold light and noise, I let myself believe I was invisible enough to get through the night unnoticed. I scanned the room out of habit more than anything, cataloging exits, familiar faces, anyone I needed to avoid. I didn't know yet that avoiding one person tonight would be impossible. I didn't know that the worst moment of my week was still waiting for me, somewhere across that crowded room. I've never forgotten the sound of his laugh cutting through the noise before I even saw his face. That laugh used to mean something safe to me once. That night, it meant the ground was about to disappear from under my feet. That laugh belonged to Richard, and it was coming from a cluster of men near the bar. The kind of men who'd known each other since boarding school and still talked like they owned the whole city. My stomach dropped before I even fully registered his face. He hadn't spotted me yet. For half a second, I actually thought I might slip past unnoticed, maybe find a quiet corner and wait him out. That hope lasted exactly as long as it took him to turn his head. Our eyes met across the room, and I watched something shift in his expression, that particular kind of smugness that used to make me feel special back when I still thought it was charm. Now it just made my skin crawl. He said something to the men beside him, low enough that I couldn't hear it, but I saw the way they all turned to look at me at once. My grip tightened around my champagne glass. I told myself to just walk the other way, but my legs didn't move fast enough. He crossed the room before I could escape, and just like that, I was surrounded. Richard introduced me to his little circle of investors like I was a museum exhibit, something interesting to look at, but not quite real. "This is my ex-wife," he said, putting just enough weight on the word ex to make it sting. A couple of the men gave polite nods. One of them smiled in a way that felt more like pity than kindness, and honestly, the pity was worse. Richard's voice had this smooth, easy charm to it that used to comfort me. That night, it felt like a blade wrapped in silk. He asked how I was holding up, loud enough for the group to hear, like he actually cared, like this wasn't a performance for an audience. I gave him a short answer, something polite and empty, hoping he'd lose interest and move on to someone else. He didn't. Instead, he leaned in slightly, still smiling that same easy smile, and made a comment about my accent, something about how it must be hard, still not quite fitting in after all these years, even with everything he'd done to help me get established here. The men around him chuckled, not cruelly exactly, just carelessly, the way people laugh at something they don't realize is actually a knife going in. I felt my face get hot. I tried to laugh it off too, because that's what you do. You match the tone so nobody sees how much it costs you. But he kept going. He mentioned, almost gently, like it was just an observation, that without his name attached to mine, people in this city might start forgetting who I even was. He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather, like he wasn't reminding an entire circle of strangers that I used to need him. I could feel my pulse in my throat. The room suddenly felt too warm, the music too loud, the perfume in the air too thick to breathe through. I glanced around and caught a couple of women nearby watching the exchange with barely concealed amusement, whispering behind their glasses. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself once, at other people's expense, before my own life fell apart and taught me better. Richard wasn't finished. He brought up my career next, mentioning how modeling contracts don't last forever, how youth fades, how it must be scary starting over at my age in a city like this one. Nothing he said was technically cruel enough to call out directly. That was always his gift, dressing humiliation up as concern so nobody could accuse him of being unkind. I stood there absorbing it, feeling smaller with every word. I wanted to say something back, something sharp enough to shut him down in front of everyone. But my throat had closed up completely, and all I could manage was a tight, polite smile that felt like it was cracking my face in half. The champagne in my glass had gone warm in my hand. I hadn't taken a single sip. One of the investors asked, almost innocently, if I was seeing anyone these days, and the whole group seemed to lean in slightly, waiting for my answer like it was entertainment. Richard's smile widened just a little, like he already knew what my silence would say. I felt heat rising up my neck, past humiliation and straight into panic. I had no answer. I had nobody. The silence stretched on just a beat too long enough for it to become its own kind of answer. I could feel the pity thickening in the air around me, could practically hear the whispers already forming for later in the night. My mind raced, searching for anything, any way out of that circle before I said something I'd regret, or, worse, before I simply broke down in front of all of them. That's when my eyes landed on her, standing alone near the far wall of the ballroom, watching the entire scene unfold with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something about the stillness in her, the sheer authority radiating off her without her even trying, made my next move feel less like a decision and more like an instinct I couldn't control. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know anything about her. Not really. All I knew was that she stood there like the noise of the room couldn't touch her, like she existed on a completely different frequency than the rest of us. She was older, maybe somewhere in her late 50s, dressed in a dark tailored suit that made every other outfit in that room look like it was trying too hard. She wasn't watching the party. She was watching me. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was pure panic. Maybe it was some kind of survival instinct kicking in before my brain could catch up. My feet started moving before I'd even fully decided to move them, carrying me straight across the ballroom floor, weaving between clusters of guests who barely registered I'd passed. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my own ears, drowning out the music, drowning out Richard's voice still ringing behind me. I reached her side, breathless, my hand finding her arm before I'd even thought it through. Her skin was warm under my fingers, and up close, she smelled like something rich and grounding, cedar and something faintly smoky. Nothing like the sweet perfumes drifting through the rest of the room. She didn't pull away. She didn't even look surprised. She just turned her head slightly toward me, waiting. I pressed my lips close to her shoulder, close enough that only she could hear me, and my voice came out shakier than I wanted it to. "Please," I whispered. "Just pretend you're with me. Just for tonight. Please." I don't know what I expected. Confusion, maybe. Rejection. A polite excuse to step away from the stranger clinging to her arm like a lifeline. Instead, she went very still for a moment, studying my face the way someone reads a document they already know the ending of. Her eyes were sharp, a deep, steady brown that didn't waver, and there was something in them I couldn't name yet, something calculating but not unkind. A few seconds passed. It felt like an hour. Then she did something I wasn't prepared for. She reached over and gently placed her hand over mine, the one still gripping her arm, and gave it the smallest, steadiest squeeze. "Okay," she said, her voice low, a little rough around the edges, carrying the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't quite place yet. Just one word. It was enough to make my knees go weak with relief. I felt my whole body sag slightly against her side, like something in me had been holding its breath for weeks and had finally been allowed to exhale. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask who I was running from, or what had happened, or why a total stranger had just grabbed her arm in the middle of a gala. She simply straightened her shoulders slightly, angled her body just enough to shield me from the rest of the room, and waited. I could feel eyes on us almost immediately. I didn't dare look back toward Richard's circle, but I could sense the shift in the air, the way conversations seemed to pause slightly around us. Whoever this woman was, people noticed when she moved. I could feel it in the way the crowd around us seemed to part just a little, the way voices dropped half a register when they passed close by. Up close, she was even more striking than she'd looked from across the room. There was something ageless about her face. lines that spoke of experience rather than time, and a stillness in her expression that suggested she'd never once needed to raise her voice to be heard. My hand was still resting against her forearm, and I could feel the steady, unhurried rhythm of her breathing under my palm, so different from the frantic pace of my own heartbeat. "Just breathe," she said quietly, not looking at me, her attention already shifting toward something over my shoulder. Her voice had this low, even quality to it, the kind that made you want to listen even when it wasn't raised. I did what she said. I breathed. For the first time all night, the tightness in my chest loosened. Just slightly. Just enough. I still didn't know her name. I still didn't know why a woman like her, radiating that much quiet authority, would agree to help a stranger without asking a single question. Part of me wondered if she was simply amused, entertained by the drama of it all, a rich woman's idle curiosity. But there was something steadier in the way she held herself next to me, something that felt less like amusement and more like quiet, deliberate protection. I felt her body shift slightly beside mine, turning us both to face the direction I'd been trying so hard to avoid all night. My pulse spiked again, but this time it felt different, less like drowning, and more like standing behind a wall for the first time in weeks. Richard was already walking toward us, his easy smile faltering slightly as his eyes moved from my face to the woman beside me, like he was trying to work out exactly who he was looking at. Richard's smile had gone thin by the time he reached us, the kind of smile people wear when they're trying to figure out if they've misjudged a situation. His eyes moved between me and the woman standing so close beside me, and I could see him recalculating everything in real time. Whatever he'd planned to say next, whatever he'd rehearsed on his walk over, I watched it die somewhere behind his teeth. "Richard," she said, before he'd even opened his mouth. Just his name, spoken flat and unhurried, like she already knew exactly who he was and had simply been waiting for him to catch up. Her voice carried none of the panic that had been living in my chest all night. It was calm in a way that made the whole moment feel smaller, like the air around us had gone quiet just to hear her better. I felt Richard's whole posture change beside us. The easy, careless confidence he'd been wearing all evening seemed to drain out of him a little, replaced by something more careful, almost wary. His eyes flicked to me for half a second, then back to her, like he was trying to work out what exactly he'd walked into. I didn't understand it yet, not fully, but I could feel it, the way the ground had somehow shifted under his feet instead of mine. "I didn't realize you two knew each other," he said, and his voice had lost some of its earlier polish. There was a stiffness to it now, careful in a way that didn't match the man who'd just spent 10 minutes humiliating me in front of his friends. She didn't answer right away. She simply tilted her head slightly, studying him the way you'd study something you already understood completely. "There's a lot you don't realize," she said finally, her tone almost gentle, which somehow made it land harder. She let her hand settle against the small of my back then, warm and steady, an anchor I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. I felt my spine straighten under that small, simple touch, like some part of me was remembering how to stand up straight again. Richard laughed, but it came out wrong, thinner than his usual laugh, missing all its earlier confidence. He glanced at the men still lingering a few steps behind him, like he was hoping for backup, some kind of support to pull the moment back onto familiar ground. None of them moved closer. If anything, they seemed to be putting distance between themselves and whatever was happening in front of them. "I was just catching up with my ex-wife," Richard said, trying to recover some of his earlier charm, though it sounded brittle now, forced. The word ex-wife came out with less bite than before, like he could feel it losing its power in front of this new audience. I stayed quiet beside her, watching this unfold, still not entirely sure what I was witnessing. "I heard," she said simply. There was nothing dramatic in how she said it, no raised voice, no sharp edge. But something about those two words made Richard's jaw tighten visibly. I noticed his hand twitch slightly at his side, like he wanted to say something else and thought better of it at the last second. She let the silence stretch a moment longer before speaking again, her voice dropping just slightly, low enough that I almost had to lean in to catch it fully. You should be more careful about what you say in rooms like this one, Richard. You never really know who's listening. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it landed like one anyway, quiet and absolute, the kind of statement that didn't need volume to carry weight. I watched something flicker behind Richard's eyes, something close to fear, though he tried to cover it fast with another stiff laugh. He said something about needing to get back to his friends, some excuse that came out too quickly, too eager to escape. He didn't look at me again before he turned. He looked at her, one last time, like he was trying to memorize a warning he didn't fully understand yet. The moment he walked away, I felt my whole body finally sag with relief, the tension I'd been carrying all night draining out of me all at once. My legs felt strangely unsteady, and I realized my hand was still resting against her arm, gripping it tighter than I probably should have. She didn't pull away. She simply covered my hand with hers again, steady and warm, grounding me back into my own body. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice cracking slightly on those two small words. I still didn't know her name. I still didn't understand what I'd just witnessed. Why a man who'd spent our entire marriage so sure of himself had just crumbled in front of a woman he clearly knew, or feared, or both. All I knew was that whoever she was, Richard was afraid of her in a way I'd never seen him afraid of anyone. She looked down at me then, something unreadable passing behind her steady brown eyes, and for the first time since I'd grabbed her arm in desperation, I saw the faintest hint of a smile. "You're still shaking," she said quietly, ignoring my thanks entirely. "Let's get you some air." I didn't know yet that stepping outside with her that night would mark the exact moment my old life ended and something entirely new, entirely unexpected began. The cold hit me the moment she pushed open the terrace doors, sharp enough to steal the breath right out of my lungs. Snow had settled along the railing in a thin, undisturbed layer, and beyond it, the lights of Boston Harbor stretched out into the darkness, scattered and glowing against the black water. The noise from the ballroom faded almost instantly behind us, muffled by heavy glass, until all I could hear was the wind and my own uneven breathing. I hadn't realized how badly I was shaking until the silence gave it room to show. My arms wrapped around myself instinctively, though the thin fabric of my gown did almost nothing against that kind of cold. She noticed immediately. Of course she did, and without a single word, she shrugged out of her own coat and settled it gently over my bare shoulders. The warmth hit me before the weight did, still holding her body heat, still carrying that same faint scent of cedar and something smoky underneath. I opened my mouth to protest, some polite reflex telling me she'd freeze without it, but she just shook her head slightly, cutting me off before I even got the words out. "I run warm," she said simply, like that settled the matter completely, and something about the flatness of her tone told me arguing would be pointless. I pulled the coat tighter around myself instead, grateful in a way that went far deeper than just the temperature. We stood there for a while without speaking, side by side at the railing, looking out over the water. I could feel her presence beside me, steady and unbothered by the cold, while I slowly stopped trembling under the weight of her coat. Something about the quiet between us didn't feel awkward the way silence with strangers usually does. It felt oddly safe, like she wasn't expecting anything from me, wasn't waiting for me to perform or explain myself. That's when it happened, without any warning at all. The tears I'd been holding back all night finally broke loose. Quiet at first, just a few slipping down my cheeks before I could stop them. Then it all came apart at once, weeks of humiliation and heartbreak spilling out of me right there on that freezing terrace, in front of a woman whose name I still didn't even know. I pressed a hand over my mouth, embarrassed, trying to pull myself back together. She didn't rush to comfort me with empty words the way most people do. She didn't tell me it was going to be okay, or that Richard wasn't worth my tears, or any of the things people usually say without really meaning them. She just stood there, close enough that I could feel her warmth beside me, giving me space to fall apart without making me feel small for doing it. "Let it out," she said quietly, after a while, her voice low and steady over the wind. There was nothing pitying in the way she said it, nothing that made me feel like a problem to be managed. It felt more like permission, like she was simply confirming that whatever I was feeling was allowed to exist out here, away from all those watching eyes inside. I cried harder after that, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old, not just about tonight, not just about Richard, but about years of feeling like I never quite belonged anywhere, not in this city, not in that marriage, not even fully in my own skin anymore. She stayed exactly where she was through all of it, solid and unmoving, like a wall I could lean against without fear of it giving way. When the worst of it finally passed, I wiped at my face with the back of my hand, feeling raw and a little embarrassed by how completely I'd unraveled in front of a stranger. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice thick and rough. "You don't even know me, and I'm out here falling apart on you." She turned her head then, studying me for a long moment before answering. "You didn't fall apart," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, almost gentle. "You just stopped pretending for a minute. There's a difference." Something about the way she said it settled deep in my chest, quieting something that had been screaming inside me for weeks. Nobody had said anything like that to me before, not once, not through this entire mess with Richard. I found myself studying her more closely then. This woman who'd stepped so effortlessly into my worst night and made it feel almost bearable. Up close, under the pale light spilling from the ballroom windows, I could see the years carved carefully into her face, not softening her at all, but somehow making her more striking. There was something ancient about the calm she carried, like she'd survived far worse nights than this one, and come out the other side steadier for it. "I don't even know your name," I said quietly, my voice still a little unsteady from crying. A small, almost amused smile touched the corner of her mouth then, the first real expression I'd seen crack through her composed exterior all night. "Morgan," she said simply, holding my gaze steadily. "And you don't have to apologize to me for being human, Kira." I froze slightly at that, a small chill running through me that had nothing to do with the winter air. I hadn't told her my name. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet, uneasy question started forming, one I wasn't ready to look at directly yet. But standing there in her coat, still warm from her body, with the whole city glittering silently behind her, I let that question drift away for now, unwilling to disturb whatever fragile peace I'd just found. Something shifted in the air between us after she said my name. Something I couldn't quite explain but felt all the way down to my bones. I searched her face for some kind of clue, some explanation for how she'd known, but she just watched me with that same calm, unreadable expression, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I decided not to push it. Not yet. Not when the warmth of her coat and the quiet of that terrace felt like the safest place I'd been in weeks. The wind picked up slightly, sending a few loose strands of my hair across my face, and without thinking, she reached out and brushed them back gently, tucking them behind my ear. Her fingers barely grazed my skin, but I felt that small touch everywhere, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coat wrapped around my shoulders. My breath caught somewhere in my throat, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I looked up at her then, really looked, and found her already watching me with an intensity that made my pulse stumble. There was something painfully honest in her eyes, something that felt like it had been waiting a long time to be seen by someone who wouldn't flinch away from it. I didn't flinch. I couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to. "Thank you," I said again, quieter this time, the words feeling too small for everything she'd already given me tonight. She shook her head slightly, like the thanks embarrassed her in some way she wasn't used to. "You don't have to keep saying that," she murmured, her voice lower now, rougher around the edges than before. The distance between us had somehow closed without either of us deciding to move, until I could feel the warmth radiating off her, until the scent of cedar and smoke wrapped around me even without the coat. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it in the silence between us. I told myself it was just gratitude, just relief, just the aftermath of a terrible night finally easing. Some part of me knew that wasn't the whole truth. She reached up slowly, her fingers grazing my jaw with a gentleness that startled me, tilting my face up toward hers just slightly. Her thumb brushed lightly along my cheekbone, wiping away the last trace of a tear I hadn't even realized was still there. The touch was so careful, so deliberate, that it undid something in my chest all over again, though this time it had nothing to do with sadness. For one suspended moment, I thought she might kiss me. I could feel it, in the way the air between us seemed to hold its breath, in the way her eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before finding my eyes again. My own heartbeat was so loud, I was certain the whole city could hear it. I didn't move away. I didn't want to. But she didn't close that last small distance the way I half expected, half hoped she would. Instead, she leaned in slowly and pressed her lips gently against my forehead, lingering there far longer than a simple gesture of comfort would. Her hand came up to rest against the side of my face, warm and steady, holding me there like something precious she wasn't ready to let go of yet. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that single kiss settle over every raw, exposed nerve in my body. It felt like a promise more than anything physical, something patient and deliberate. Nothing like the careless affection I'd grown used to in my marriage. When she finally pulled back, just slightly, her hand still lingered against my cheek, like she wasn't quite ready to break the connection completely. "You're not alone tonight," she said softly, her voice barely above the wind. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly poetic, but it landed somewhere deep inside me, somewhere that had been empty and aching for far longer than these past few weeks. I felt tears threaten again, but this time they weren't born from grief. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer her right away. Instead, I simply leaned my head slightly into her palm, letting myself lean on someone else's strength for the first time in longer than I could remember. The city lights blurred slightly through the fresh wetness in my eyes, and for just a moment, the entire weight of the evening, of the last 3 weeks, of the last 5 years, felt distant and quiet. We stood like that for a while, wrapped in silence and cold air, and something neither of us said out loud yet. I didn't know her last name. I didn't know what she did, who she really was, or why Richard's face had gone pale the moment she spoke his name. All I knew, standing there in her coat with her hand still warm against my cheek, was that some fragile, unfamiliar feeling had planted itself quietly in my chest, and I had absolutely no idea yet how deep its roots would go. I woke up the next morning, still wrapped in the memory of that terrace, my fingers unconsciously reaching for the warmth of a coat I no longer had. Sunlight cut through my apartment blinds in thin, harsh stripes, and for a few groggy seconds, I let myself simply feel good. Lighter somehow, like something inside me had loosened overnight. That peace didn't last very long at all. My phone had been buzzing against the nightstand for a while before I finally reached for it, my mind still half tangled in thoughts of cedar-scented coats and quiet forehead kisses. I had several missed calls from my agent, Diane, along with a string of increasingly urgent texts. That alone was enough to make my stomach tighten slightly, though nothing could have prepared me for what she actually wanted to talk about. I called her back immediately, still lying in bed, my voice still thick with sleep. She didn't even bother with a greeting before launching straight into it, her words tumbling out too fast, almost frantic. "Kira, do you have any idea who you were with last night? At the gala? People are talking. And I mean really talking. Her tone had this edge to it I'd never heard from her before, something close to genuine alarm. I sat up slowly, confusion pulling me fully awake now. "You mean Morgan?" I asked, still not understanding the urgency in her voice. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. "Kira," Diane said carefully, like she was choosing each word with deliberate caution. "That woman isn't just some rich socialite you can casually make friends with." My chest tightened slightly as she continued, her voice dropping lower like she was worried about being overheard even through the phone. She explained, piece by piece, that Morgan wasn't simply wealthy or influential in the way I'd assumed. She ran something much bigger, much more dangerous, an organization with its hands deep in construction, shipping, and half the businesses that quietly kept this city running. People didn't cross her. People who tried usually disappeared from relevance entirely, sometimes disappeared altogether. I felt the blood drain slowly from my face as Diane kept talking, mentioning names I vaguely recognized, business deals that had fallen apart overnight for reasons nobody ever fully explained. She said Morgan's name, like it carried its own weight, like just saying it out loud required a certain amount of caution. "She's not someone you play games with," Diane said finally. "And definitely not someone you want attached to your name publicly, not after everything with Richard." My mind raced back instantly to the gala, to the way Richard's whole demeanor had shifted the moment Morgan spoke his name, the way his easy confidence had crumbled into something close to fear. At the time, I'd told myself it was simply Morgan's natural authority, some powerful presence that intimidated everyone around her. Now, hearing Diane's words, that memory took on a completely different weight, colder and far more unsettling. I barely heard the rest of what Diane said, something about damage control, about being careful who saw us together again, about how this could affect my career depending on how things played out. My mind was stuck on the terrace, on the warmth of Morgan's coat around my shoulders, on the gentle press of her lips against my forehead. None of that had felt dangerous. None of that had felt like anything except the safest I'd felt in weeks. After I hung up, I sat there frozen on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring blankly at the wall across from me. Every soft, careful moment from the night before replayed itself in my mind, except now, laced through all of it, was this new, unsettling knowledge I couldn't quite shake off. The woman who had wiped my tears away so gently, who had known my name before I'd even given it to her, controlled far more than just one intimidated ex-husband. I thought about how easily she'd made Richard back down, how the entire group of investors around him had gone quiet the moment she spoke. At the time, it had felt like relief, like rescue. Now it felt like a warning sign I'd been too grateful, too emotionally raw to notice. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling suddenly exposed in a way I hadn't felt even standing on that freezing terrace hours earlier. Guilt crept in slowly alongside the fear. Guilt for how comforted I'd felt, how safe, how seen. I told myself it didn't matter who Morgan really was outside that terrace, that the woman who'd held me while I cried was still real, still genuine. But another quieter, more frightened part of me couldn't stop wondering exactly what I'd pulled myself into the moment I'd grabbed a stranger's arm and begged her for help. I sat there long after the call ended, staring at my phone like it might offer some kind of answer. My reflection in the dark screen looked pale, uncertain. Nothing like the composed woman who'd walked confidently into that gala just 12 hours earlier. Whatever safety I'd felt in Morgan's arms the night before now sat tangled up with something far more complicated, and I had absolutely no idea which feeling I was supposed to trust. I spent the rest of that morning pacing my apartment, phone clutched in my hand like it might ring again with worse news. Every time I passed my closet, I found myself eyeing the small suitcase tucked in the back corner, the one I hadn't used since a work trip months earlier. New York kept surfacing in my mind, a clean escape, a city big enough to disappear into if I needed to start over somewhere, Morgan's name didn't carry the same weight. I actually pulled the suitcase out around noon, setting it open on my bed with a kind of numb determination. I told myself it was the smart thing to do, the safe thing, the thing any reasonable person would do after learning what Diane had just told me. I started pulling clothes from hangers without really seeing them, my mind still tangled up in cedar-scented memories I couldn't quite reconcile with everything else I now knew. I was halfway through folding a sweater when my doorbell rang, sharp and sudden enough to make me flinch. My whole body went rigid for a moment, some irrational part of my brain half expecting security men in dark suits, though I couldn't have said exactly what I thought they might do. I approached the door slowly, my heart hammering, and peered through the peephole before allowing myself to breathe again. It was just a delivery man, holding a simple, unassuming bouquet of small white and pale purple wildflowers, nothing like the extravagant arrangements florists usually sent from wealthy clients. I opened the door carefully, still a little shaky, and took the flowers from him with a quiet thank you. There was no card visible at first glance, just plain brown paper wrapped gently around the stems. I carried them back inside and set them down on my kitchen counter, staring at them for a long moment before I noticed the small folded note tucked between the stems. My fingers hesitated before pulling it free, some part of me already sensing who it was from before I even opened it. The handwriting inside was neat, deliberate, nothing like I expected from someone Diane had described with so much fear in her voice. The note was short, simple, nothing dramatic or demanding. It just said she was sorry if last night had caused trouble for my reputation, that she hadn't meant to complicate my life further after everything I was already carrying. At the bottom, she'd written a simple invitation, asking if I'd let her make up for it over dinner. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door if I wanted to walk through it. I read those few lines over and over, feeling something in my chest loosen slightly despite everything Diane had warned me about that morning. There was something about the wildflowers themselves that struck me the most. Nothing showy, nothing meant to impress. I remembered, almost with a jolt, mentioning once on that terrace, in passing, how wildflowers back home in Russia used to grow wild along the road near my childhood house. I hadn't thought she'd been paying attention that closely. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, the note still held loosely between my fingers, staring at those simple flowers like they held some kind of answer I desperately needed. Everything Diane had told me about Morgan's power, her danger, the fear she inspired in people who mattered in this city, none of that matched the quiet, careful gesture sitting in front of me now. I felt the pull of two completely different truths, and I didn't know which one to trust. Something about the memory of that forehead kiss on the terrace kept resurfacing every time I tried to convince myself to keep packing. I remembered the steadiness of her voice telling me I wasn't alone, the careful way she'd wiped my tears without ever asking me to explain myself. Whoever else Morgan was outside of that terrace, whatever power she held over the rest of this city, she hadn't used any of it against me. She'd only ever used it to shield me. I glanced over at my half-packed suitcase sitting open on my bed, then back at the small, unpretentious bouquet on my counter, feeling the weight of the decision settle heavily in my chest. Running felt safe in theory, but some quieter part of me knew that running from Boston wouldn't actually fix anything. Not really. It would just be another version of hiding. Another version of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. By evening, I found myself closing the suitcase instead of finishing packing it, sliding it back into the closet where it had come from. I picked up my phone and typed out a short reply to the number scrawled at the bottom of her note, the one she'd left just in case I wanted to respond. My fingers hesitated over the screen for a long moment before I finally pressed send, agreeing to dinner, agreeing to at least hear her out properly. I told myself it was just curiosity, just wanting answers, nothing more complicated than that. But standing there afterward, staring at those wildflowers glowing softly under my kitchen light, I already suspected I was lying to myself. Whatever Morgan really was outside that ballroom, outside that terrace, some part of me had already decided I wanted to find out, no matter what everyone else in this city seemed so afraid of. That's where I have to leave things for now. This part of my story is already a lot to sit with, and I promise you, what happened next changed everything even more. The continuation of this story is coming very soon, so make sure you're still with me when it does, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's on the other side of that dinner invitation.